Hey everybody, today we're going to continue our discussion of stabilization policy by looking a little bit more carefully at taxes and the federal government's budget. And the goal is to understand a little bit more about the types of taxes that citizens pay, as well as the difference between discretionary and non-discretionary spending. So we start our discussion with recognizing a reality, which is that taxes are what we pay for a civilized society. Nobody wants to pay taxes necessarily, but they're essential to the functioning of government in order to preserve a civilized society. And so the reality is that they need to be paid. The issue in economics is really what's the appropriate type of taxes that we should be pursuing in order to achieve some sort of outcome or goal for the overall economy. And there are a number of reasons why we pay taxes. We pay taxes for schools, for fire and police, for welfare programs, for infrastructure, roads and bridges and other things. So there's lots of reasons why the taxes are useful and important. The federal government gets the bulk of its income from two sources. Personal income tax, which is approximately $1.7 trillion in 2021. And the payroll tax, which is about $1.3 trillion. And by payroll tax, we're talking about Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. There are other sources of income like the corporate income tax, excise taxes, estate taxes, and other things that are also sources of revenue for the federal government. Now, when it comes to income taxes, the government has sort of three choices in how it can implement its tax plan. One is to use what's known as a progressive tax. In a progressive tax, those who earn a higher income pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes. So the United States income tax is an example of a progressive tax. The more you earn, not only do you pay more, but you pay a higher income tax rate. And in the United States, we use what's known as a marginal tax rate system. So we don't tax every dollar the same percentage rate. We actually chunk up your income, and each progressively larger chunk of income gets charged at a progressively higher income tax rate. So one way to view it is to say, to simplify it, is really the first, we'll say first $25,000 you earn is going to get taxed at 10%. Then the next $25,000 chunk of income would be taxed at 20%. And the third chunk of $25,000 worth of income would be taxed at 30%. So if you're making $75,000, you're paying 10% on the first $25,000, 20% on the next $25,000, and 30% on the final $25,000 of your income. In the United States, the way this might work in 2021, if we were to earn a taxable income of $80,000, we'd see that for the first $9,950, we pay 10% in taxes. For the next chunk, it's 12%, and that final chunk leading up to our $80,000 income would be charged at 22%. So we would pay a progressively higher income tax rate for each of those increasing levels of income. So that the effective tax rate is not 22%. Instead, it's about 16.7%. If you were to add the different chunks of income tax, $955, $3,720, $8,684.50, you'd find that really effectively you're paying a 17 or 16.7% tax on your income. When you look at who is actually paying income taxes in the United States, it turns out that the largest portion of income tax is paid by the top earners in America. Fully 40% of income taxes, total income taxes paid in the United States in 2021 were paid by the top 1% of income earners in America. And really the top 50% of all income earners paid about 97% of income taxes. So we're extraordinarily progressive in our income tax system. You don't have to do a progressive tax if you don't want. You could use a proportional tax. That is an option. A proportional tax is one in which everyone pays the same percentage regardless of income. So this is sort of the concept of a flat tax. No matter how much you earn, everyone pays 20% on their income. an example of a proportional tax might be sales tax. It doesn't matter how much you earn, everyone pays the same percentage. And a final option is what we call a regressive tax. In a regressive tax system, people with lower levels of income pay a higher percentage of their income in tax than those who earn more. So, for example, a payroll tax, the way we have it set up in America today is essentially a regressive tax because there's a cap on income. After you reach a certain level of income, you no longer pay the payroll tax. So if you earn enough to get past the cap, then the payroll tax isn't really 6.4% of your total income. It's only 6.4% of the income you earned up until that point. Whereas those who earn less than the cap are paying the full share. So as a percentage of their income, it's going to be much higher for those at the lower end than at the upper end. When it comes to spending the money that the government has collected, there are two different categories we typically lump the spending into. One is called discretionary spending, the other is non-discretionary spending. With discretionary spending, it means the government has its discretion and has a choice as to whether to spend money from year to year on those programs or not. So Congress has full control over this. And so we're talking about things like the department budgets. They decide how much they're going to spend each year in defense spending, how much they're going to spend on agriculture or commerce or education. And every year they can either cut it, shrink it, grow it, whatever they want to do with it. But they have full control over the budget. Non-discretionary spending is out of government's control. They control it so much as they can decide whether to keep the program or not, I suppose. But the reality is that we're talking about things like welfare programs. The Congress has no idea how much they're going to spend from year to year on these programs because they don't know how many people are going to qualify from year to year. So the non-discretionary end of the budget is in many regards out of their control, other than they can sort of set what the benefits are going to be at the beginning of the year, but after that, the total spending is whatever it's going to be, depending on who qualifies and who doesn't. So examples, again, of sort of discretionary versus non-discretionary. Discretionary spending, Defense Department, Department of Education, Homeland Security, these are things that they can control from year to year. Mandatory spending, or non-discretionary, would be things like Social Security. Once you reach retirement age, you get Social Security. Congress has no control over this. Medicare, Medicaid, interest on national debt, these are things that they have to pay. They're obligated to, as long as the program exists, they've got to pay, and whoever qualifies gets paid the promised amount, no matter what. If you're looking at the share of the total federal budget for each of these categories, discretionary spending, the part that Congress can control, is only about 23% of total spending in 2021. Almost 3/4 of the entire federal government's spending is non-discretionary in nature. It is out of Congress's control. They are obligated to spend that money, and especially if you include interest on the debt. If you want to look at some more data in 2020, you can see defense spending is about 10% of total government outlays, non-defense about 13%. And then you get in things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. These mandatory spending items are taking up the largest share of the federal budget. So is this a problem? Maybe, maybe not. One reason to be concerned is in part because so much of the government spending is non-discretionary in nature. It is extraordinarily difficult for Congress to get their hands around total spending. And as we talked about in the previous class with deficits and surpluses, it means that the job of Congress to find the money to pay for all of its programs is exponentially more difficult because the total costs are beyond their control. And when you throw in politics, it gets very, very difficult for Congress to do much when it comes to controlling its spending if it wanted to do so. So if you find yourself in an inflationary gap where economic policy or theory says that you should be slowing down aggregate demand, the problem for Congress at the national level is, what is there to cut in order to slow aggregate demand? There's very little that they can do, which sort of ties their hands a little bit. One other challenge is just how budgeting is done in the United States. We use what's called baseline budgeting at the national level, the federal level, which means the Congress basically takes what they spent last year and they assume that they're going to spend all of that plus a certain percentage increase. They just always assume the budget's going to grow by a certain percent. And so then politics kicks in and it gets difficult to cut spending because if you cut the rate of growth in spending, it's considered a cut in spending, even though you're spending more money. So it gets a little complicated and challenging for Congress to try and make any sort of cuts in its outlays, because even if you're growing, you're cutting, and that makes it pretty difficult for them. So we'll talk more about these things in class, and there are some readings that I'll share in class, and I'll put in the description for the video, and I will see you then.